to The Insomniac Show with Nicolette and Brian. We'll get real deep with you, educating, inspiring, and solving problems with some of the most inspirational humans on the planet. Buckle up and come on the journey.
I'm excited.
All right, guys, I'm Nicolette, and today Brian and I are here with Deborah Bishop. She also goes by Rev Deb. She's also an inspirational performance artist and consultant and many, many other things. So we're just going to let Deborah tell us a little bit about what she does. But thank you so much for joining us today. We really do appreciate your time.
I'm very excited to be here. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. So why don't you kick us off then by telling us a little bit about what you do, your journey to performer. You're also got some psychic medium stuff going on in there, right? You're doing a lot of creative stuff. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that journey?
I am, and I thank you for that. And I need to probably pare it down. But, it's really hard to identify as just one thing, and at least for me. And I've tried on many occasions to do that. And then I end up I have groups of people that know me different ways. And for me, that creates too much of a sort of a scattered or segmented person. So rather than do that, I just kind of let it spill out. So from a performance standpoint, I stepped on stage when I was 4 for the very first time. And I really haven't gotten off the stage since, one way or the other. I am one that actually loves the spotlight. But on the other side of that, I also am very reclusive. So I'm both of those things. I was born with a sensibility that nobody could explain to me. And I really didn't meet anybody else that thought and saw the world that I did until I was, I think, 16. So I really felt like I came from another planet. And I never really talked about the fact that I saw things and understood things and just saw things happening for people, and I didn't know what to call it. So the psychic mediumship kind of came along later when I understood what that was, and channeling and all of that. And I was born in Vancouver. I moved to Los Angeles. And of course, in Los Angeles, it was sort of like, that's cool. So I really started to study at that point. And it's been a kind of a lifelong journey for me in studying the different modalities of healing, different philosophies, different religions. And I became a minister because I was doing hands-on energy work. And then that later took on more meaning to me. And I also got my doctorate of divinity over the years because I just had been studying so many different things that just made sense. And now today, my music, my background in music and acting and writing and directing has all played a role in my life. And now it's kind of coming together to play a role in what I feel I'm truly here to do, which is really help people uplift their consciousness, become more conscious, and in a really perhaps a more simpler way of saying that is helping people to understand when they're doing absolutely everything right, but they keep hitting the wall and it's painful and they don't want to keep hitting the wall anymore, but they don't know how to stop. It's like somebody who says, oh, I really want this. I really want this. And they get so close. And every time they get so close, something happens and they don't get to have it. And it happens not once, but twice, but 3, but 4, but 5 times until they decide that maybe it's just not something they can have. And I'm here to say, yeah, you can have whatever you want. You just actually have to understand how to give yourself permission to get there. So that's me in a nutshell. I don't know what kind of nut you might call that, but that's me in a nutshell.
So, all right. So I've got so many questions, and I do want to touch on a little bit of that. You can have whatever you want, but and I think, you talk about life as a big drive-through window, which might be tied into that. So I want to hold off on that for a second, because I would like to talk a little bit more about your mediumship and kind of what were those things that you were feeling and experiencing that you couldn't quite understand what they were, and dive in a little bit more to that process of you understanding what they were.
Well, as a child, I found myself able to kind of feel, this sounds sort of crazy, but for me, the interpretation was I could feel the trees. I could feel the earth. I could, communicate in a way that I didn't know what to call it. So what do you call it? And nobody around you's talking about it. You don't grow up in a world that says, oh yeah, that's what this is. I could play with the fairies, if you will. But again, there was nobody in my world to tell me what that was. And then my parents thought, they'd give me the best education they could. So I went to a private Catholic school. I was never Catholic. I was actually high Anglican. My parents are originally from Africa. So they have the English version of the high Anglican, which is Catholicism where you can get divorced. I mean, that's what it is. So I was never really, I had to do all of the rituals, but I was never allowed to go to the front of the church and have the blood in the body of Christ, which was fine with me. I didn't really want to. But I remember in second grade really being aware. I was looking around this beautiful little church and all these kids were lined up to get communion and I had to sit there, and kids are mean and they all kind of whispered what's wrong with her? And I looked around and I went, this is not the house of God. And that was pretty bold for a second grader to actually say, I guess. And it led me kind of on this idea of what spirituality, although I didn't know, I didn't know what that was. There was nobody to have a conversation with. As I got a little bit older, I got sent out of my religion classes every once in a while because I would ask questions. I would see things sometimes. I would look at people and I would see something about them, about what was happening for them, about what could happen for them. I didn't know the timelines. Now I realize I was seeing the possibilities of what's in front of them, what was on their mind, what the answer to that question was. And I remember when I was about 10 or 11, and this sounds a bit creepy, it really wasn't, but I literally would have people walk up to me and ask me a question. It was the most normal thing to do. And I would answer the question. And it was usually something to do with just, I'm experiencing this, I don't know why, but I feel like I need to ask you about it. And I'd be like, oh, okay. Well, this is what I get, and you're going through it because of this and this. And then they'd walk away and I would never think twice about it. And again, never said anything to anybody about it because it just felt like my secret, Mm-hmm. And so it was sort of a part of me that was very detached. And thankfully I had the arts. Thankfully I had, I was a ballet dancer for many years. I did all sorts of dancing. I had competitive choir and singing and music, and because that's really, I think, what kept me sane. That gave me a place to express because I just didn't have anywhere else to go. And I certainly didn't know how to talk to my parents about it. It's nothing that they experienced or knew. So it was like a stranger in a foreign land that just spoke a language that nobody else did. So that's a bit of what it was. And I remember seeing disembodied individuals every once in a while. I didn't know what they were. I wasn't afraid of them, and they were never harmful. I didn't ever feel like, the movies where you have the freezing cold and it's very eerie. No, I never felt anything like that. Never have felt anything like that. But what I realized was I was actually connecting with individuals who had crossed over. And I've always, in my home, for as long as I can remember, once I knew what I was doing, there's always been a portal in my house for souls or spirits who have been sort of stuck, who want to get over to the other side. They're able to kind of pass through. That's just something that's been part of, I guess, my life mission. I don't deal with them. It's sort of it's just a place that's a portal that they can go through. So that's just part of the life that I live, or the world that I live in, and the way that my house is set up. Because if I don't set it up that way, then I do deal with them because they do show up. But it's usually not to have conversations with anybody. It's more that they're ready to leave, and they didn't leave when they had the chance. And so they have that portal to go. And if I don't set that up, then they're kind of knocking on my door, if you will, going, help us out. And that's not really fun. So I don't like doing that. So we let them go.
Okay, so before we get into the disembodied, right? Let's talk about where the feelings come from, right? Or where your sense. So when people came up and asked you things, right? You felt like you knew something. Mm-hmm. Now, do you believe that was coming from within, or you were tapping into some universal intelligence or other time frames where things were happening? Where do you feel like that was coming from, that information?
So what I can explain it is this way. We're all connected by grid lines, energetic grid. Everything is an energetic grid. So at least the way that I perceive it. And so it's quite fascinating because we're connected to everything and everyone and all life.
Are you talking about ley lines? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, kind of like ley lines, but they're energetic. I mean, they're connecting up and out. Like, okay. So if you were to consider that, then basically what I do is I ride the grid line. And that allows me, and only with permission, I do not do it otherwise because I think it's incredibly invasive. But that allows me to kind of ride up and kind of go and connect with whomever and kind of ride down their grid line and just see what's there. So in a lot of ways, it's what I've come to understand is it is kind of just communicating with their own higher self. I'm not telling them anything that they're not ready to hear. And I'm not telling them anything that's not possible for them because it's all within their own grid line. It's all within their life path or process. And I'm a little bit different when people have come to me specifically for guidance. I tend to give them several options because we never have just one choice. There's variables. And so when somebody's looking at something in their life, they're like, well, what would happen if I do this? It's like, well, if you do that, this could happen, but if you do it this way, then that could shift it over here. Here's where the greatest benefit lies, but you could also be successful over here. It's just going to be a harder path. So I tend to give people multiple choice, and it's not because that's just how it is for me. I didn't ever learn this. It's just been something I was given, and I can control it, but I can't stop it, if you will, and I wouldn't want to.
So here's my question. What's on the other side of the grid line? Right? You're riding up the grid line, you get to the top. I mean, even if you don't know, what do you believe is there?
I think that consciousness goes on. What I have seen is that, consciousness shifts and changes in form. I think that we become far more connected. What I have seen is that we're no longer separate. We become far more connected. We do have what we would call soul families, which we interact with here when we're in physical embodiment. And so soulmates, so people go, oh, I want to meet my soulmate. Well, we have a lot of soulmates. We really do. There are people that we've traveled with before. So I believe that we reconnect with that. And we go through our own sort of education being here. That's the way that I have come to understand it. That's what I've seen. It's like, this is life in the classroom. And I think we are here to master this existence. And by mastery, what I see is learning that we are creators, that we can consciously create. And not only that, but our task here is to consciously co-create. So it's not just okay for me to say, hey, I can create my world. I'm just going to go do that. Awesome. It's, I can create my world. I'm learning how to do that. However, we're an interdependent species as human beings. So therefore, what I create is running up against what you create. We're butting up against one another. So rather than why don't we collaborate? Why don't we join? And so I believe that's what we're here to do, is not just master how we create our lives, but master how to create life as a community. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Good.
So then would you say that, creativity is at the heart of all of this in a sense? And I know, Brian, you'd love to talk about creativity. And I was thinking about...
That's a good question.
I was thinking about what you were saying, Deborah, when you were talking about using, the arts and whatnot as a channel to kind of deal with these things that you were going through. But I wonder, do you think that part of your ability is because you are such a creative and open mind as well? Do you think it's the like are people who are more creative more likely to end up with such a gift?
I think that people who are, and creativity is an interesting word, because I think accountants can be creative, right? They're just creative in their modality. So we have to be careful when we talk about creativity, because people tend to put it to the arts and they put it to that. And I think everybody is creative. So I think that comes back to creationism. Are we creating? And I don't mean that from the biblical sense. That's not, I mean it more of like, how are we conscious about what we are choosing? That's the type of creativity that I think of when you talk about, well, is it more creative? However, if you deal with individuals who are a little more artistically inclined, I will say that what I've encountered is more of an open-mindedness.
Mm-hmm.
I find them a little less closed off. And whether that's just the freedom of expression that keeps that part of their brain open and operating, it could very well be. Whereas others who are kind of into more of a really logical space in life, and they really feel that logic and they're feeding that logic, and it's always, 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 always logical. I think that unfortunately, because this is not a typical conversation, they end up being more closed off. And I don't know that that's really what their heart or soul wants, but it's what their world looks like. And that's acceptable. So then if they open up to this stuff, then they run the risk of ridicule, because this is, again, not a common conversation. This becomes like a weird, woo-woo, strange, and depending on what direction you take it in, it could be conspiracy. It's all of these weird things that they don't ever want to be identified with. And I think that's really, really unfortunate, because every time we cut ourselves off, we are literally giving up our own ability, our own power, our own essence, our own divinity. We're cutting it off, and we're not allowing ourselves that freedom to literally have. And we get back to whatever we want. Have I mastered that? No, I have not. But do I understand it's possible? Yes, I do. And sometimes I wish I could just sort of get all the human stuff out of the way. But at the same time, it's like, I love this body. Being human is a lot of fun. And I do consider myself a human being, a spiritual and human being, a human and spiritual being. I consider the two intrinsically connected. And I try to stay as open as I possibly can to those things, which has meant sometimes that, I have been almost sort of fearful of speaking the way that I'm speaking to you right now, because I've worked with many clients that are doctors and lawyers and scientists and come from that logic, and they don't always realize what we're doing when we're working. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes I get a little bit like, I wonder if they'd feel like, oh, who was I working with? I haven't run into that, but still, it's that fear of judgment, I guess, fear of being judged. Mm-hmm. I ran into it really recently with somebody actually that does a talk show that read that I had psychic and medium in my bio, and all of a sudden went, yeah, I don't think you're right. And I had to basically say, wait a minute. And basically I'm going to do the show, but I had to actually stand up for myself, because their idea of what a psychic and medium was versus the idea of being Christian, right? And I consider myself Christian. So it was like, how... but that's how the world scope is, because again, this is a conversation that is had in certain places. It's not a conversation you have around the dinner table.
Well, I mean, it's interesting you bring that up, that they say like, oh, it's not necessarily Christian, right? I mean, isn't reincarnation part of Christianity? Like, let's be honest, even, Christianity is a formation of people who chose to put certain stories in the Bible, and not stories in the Bible or modern Christianity. There's a whole bunch of other parts of Christianity and that history that are just not even in there, that people are not aware of, which is crazy. I mean, people talk about the Book of Enoch all the time, right? Completely different part of Christianity. But back to the disembodied, right? Now,
oh gosh, we were coming back to this.
I love ghosts. We're getting back to this. So to the disembodied, right? Do you believe that the reason why you could feel them, or I don't know if you feel them, you see them, you talk to them, like, I don't know what your kind of
all of the above. It just depends. Like, okay. I feel, I sometimes taste things. That's not my favorite. Small things. It just depends. But it's not always all of those things. It just comes in on some of those levels. Yeah. So
do you believe, one, that's because you're open-minded, and also two, right? Also, two, you're very into energy, and everything is energy, right? We know that everything is basically composed of energy. Do you believe that's sort of why you could feel those things on both aspects?
I don't have an answer for that, because I honestly am not sure why it is that It's something I do. And I know a lot of other people like me as well. I'm not 100% sure why. Sure, I'm open-minded, but how can you not be? Right? I guess I could have closed off entirely. And had I never met, and I met a psychic actually when I was either 16 or 18, I don't remember, but I met a psychic, and that was the first time I'd met anybody like that. I hadn't met anybody like that before. And that was like so freeing, because it was like, I'm not the only one. That's what this is called. That's really cool. You know, and that opened up. And for me, it's always been like any studying I've done, any modalities I've worked with, any learning I've done, it's like I walk into this big hallway and all of a sudden all these doors just fly open. And it's like, I don't know, I see the picture or the movie where the books are swirling around. It's kind of like that. It's like all of a sudden, it's like the door opens and the information just kind of flies in. And I know that sounds really weird, but that's kind of how it is. And for a long time, I used to, and I still write, I journal almost every day. And for a long, long time in my journey, what I would find is I'd be writing stuff. I don't know where it was coming from or what it was, but I'd just be writing about it, energy, light, all of this. And then I'd show up at a lecture or a workshop, and they would be talking about exactly what I just wrote about. So all I can say is I came this way. I came into this life this way, and I didn't shut it down. So I'm blessed in that regard. I think my exposure to the arts did keep that side of me open. I think also the fact that I was able to meet somebody else like me, and the fact that I was never, ever going to be someone, I just was never programmed to be somebody that was going to go be in a tower office somewhere. And that was, so I never tried to fit into that. If anything, I never tried to fit in anywhere, which has its own cost, believe me. But I never felt like that was the right thing for me to do. And honestly, I still don't. It's like when you're like, how do you want us to introduce you? I'm like, well, I don't know how to fit into that model of like, this is what I do. Right. You know, I perform to inspire. I teach to inspire, and I work with clients to help and bring them to a level in their life where they can live that inspired life. There are a lot of people out there with big drive, big ambition, and big vision to do something really amazing, but they can't access it. They don't know how, because nobody's taught them that they can, that's possible, that they have that vision or that dream because it's meant to be theirs. It's the work they're actually meant to do, but they don't run into anybody telling them that. So instead they shut down and focus on the things that we're taught or told to do. And you know, the bottom line with all of that is at some point they wake up one day and they wonder what happened. And it doesn't mean they had a bad life. It just means they kind of go, you know, is this all there is? There is that moment that people have, whether they admit it or not. They have that moment and they wonder, well, did I do it right? Was it worth it? Because they still feel like there's something inside of them that wants to get out.
So does this lead into kind of what you talk about, what you refer to as an instant breakthrough?
Yes.
I feel like we're leading there right now. So I now might be a good time to touch on that.
So an instant breakthrough is a way that I help people to kind of become a little more familiar with how I work or how it could work for them. And so this is very much about helping them. I call it like taking the blinders off. No matter how open-minded we are, we do tend to get very linearly focused. That's a hard word to say, by the way, linearly focused. So when we're linearly focused, we tend to do this, right? We tend, like the horses with the blinders on, because they got to see what's in front of them. And we have a tendency over time to do this because, you know, life has told us to do certain things. We have kids, do those, you know, we've got to be responsible. We have our obligations. We got okay. So what used to be this really incredible 360-degree amazing view of everything that was possible slowly dwindles down to this sort of straight ahead angle. And sure, there's flutters of things here and there to the right and to the left every once in a while, but we really do feel like this is the way it has to be. And we look at people around us and guess what? they're in that same place. For the most part, that's what our parents did, because that's what we're taught. We do what we're taught. And so an instant breakthrough is really about taking the blinders off. It's helping people to reimagine a world where they're not having to be linearly focused, but rather they're beginning to look at, wow, okay, what really created this for me? Why am I actually right here now in my life? And is this working for me? Does this serve me? What was the thing that made me go, this has to be it? Not this is it, but this has to be it. And that's a really huge distinction. A lot of people live where they live because they feel like that's what they have to do. And that's who they need to be. Not that that's where they want to be or who they want to be, but that's what they have to do. And so the instant breakthrough is all about taking the haves and the shoulds and removing them and saying, okay, what's the view now that you can see it? Now that you don't have blinders, what's the view that you're really seeing? And that is life changing for people. And I don't say that to scare anybody, because people are actually terrified of change. And I totally get it, because we're moving into the unknown. The minute that we change anything, we're into the unknown. Like, you don't know how to do that. But just because you don't know how to do it doesn't mean it's not possible for you to do. It just means that some part of you believes that you need to just keep doing what you always known how to do. The problem with that is that that keeps you stuck. You can still grow, but you grow in this sort of linear direction. Again, you put the blinders back on. So an instant breakthrough, in the simplest terms, is taking the blinders off and restoring people to a place where they have a 360-degree perspective again on where they really are in their world and how they actually got there.
Do you think with some people, right, even when they take the blinders off, they still don't, like, they know they need to change this or do this, but they don't react because they're a fear or complacency or things like that? Because you run across a lot of people that actually happens to. They don't want to make changes because they're afraid or because they're comfortable in their current situation. And there's going to be some discomfort if they change courses.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. Totally correct to what you just said. And fear is the biggest factor. The complacency actually comes from fear. All of that struggle comes from fear. It all comes back to this fear of, not being able to, put it in a literal sense, not being able to survive. We are all programmed to survive. So somewhere in our consciousness, running on radio silence, is a little pattern that we learned before we were 7 years of age that taught us that we need to do things a certain way in order to survive, in order to feel safe. So the minute that you take those blinders off, yeah, there's a lot there that can feel incredibly inspiring and uplifting and amazing and awesome. And at the same time, terrifying, because you're suddenly in a vulnerable situation where something could happen and, oh my gosh, now I don't feel safe. I don't know how to do this. I've always wanted to do this, but I don't know how to do it. And then as we grow up, we have all these lovely little stories about not being good enough, never being enough, not being smart enough, not having what it takes, all of these stories. And then we don't want anybody else to ever know that about us. So if I believe I'm not good enough, I don't want anybody to know that I believe I'm not good enough. So therefore, I'm going to keep doing what I know I can do and not necessarily stretch, because, oh my gosh, if I do, then somebody might figure out that I'm really not good enough. Oh, that can't happen. And again, it's all running on radio silence. It's amazing what our neurons fire and wire to and how much they direct us without us even really understanding why.
Yeah, I think too, the other thing I feel like I see a lot is people have a tendency not to want to necessarily put the work in to achieve the things they want to achieve, because some things require a lot of work, and some people, they just don't want to put the energy into it or the hard work into it.
They do. And at the same time, though, I will say this, I have really met very rarely an authentically lazy person. What I have met are people who have given up because they just don't believe they can. And so the idea of, I'm going to go for it, but I don't believe I can. I'm going to make this happen, but it's never going to happen for me. At some point, they're just like, why bother? What you're talking about, I call it kind of like the why bother syndrome of
Right.
like, why would I even attempt to go for that? Because in the back of their mind, somewhere back there is this little, like I said, it's running on radio silent, but it's basically telling the story of being useless and worthless, and you don't deserve it.
Right.
You're messed up. You're effed up. You're all of those things. And so they get to a place where they disconnect just enough. And then it goes more and more over the years to where they'll sit down in front of the TV and just.
So really, we're talking about almost self-belief, right? They just have stopped believing in whatever it is, their dream or themselves or whatever. Because
if they ever believe in it, because again, a
Right.
lot of this programming happens between the ages of 0 and 6. That's what we're really talking about.
Mhm.
And it's not, it's not pointing fingers at parents or anything. It's not
Right.
all what I'm doing. It's just, we are designed a specific way. And between the ages of 0 and 6, we have no capacity whatsoever to look at life outside of us as being outside of us. Therefore, everything that happens, we believe we're at cause for. So the minute that we don't feel safe, and whatever that means, it could be that our teddy bear has gone missing. I had a client where their teddy bear went missing. That was the teddy bear they came home from the hospital with. It had a severe impact on them. It made them literally believe, don't ever get too attached to anything, because suddenly one day it could just disappear. And that is so painful and so devastating. And it feels so uncomfortable. And I felt so unsafe that no, don't ever get too attached to anything. And because of that, they would completely derail their success over and over and over again. They would completely derail their relationships over and over and over again, because they truly believed that if they committed, that something out of the blue would happen and it would just go away. And it was so painful at 2 or 3 years of age that there was that little program that went in there and went, no, we don't want to ever do that again. So this is something that is like, we just got very scientific, by the way. So this is how your neurons work. But this is what most people are dealing with. And again, we don't talk about this. I think it's absolutely a disaster that we do not include this in our educational system, that we don't teach children how they work, how their brain works, what their thoughts are, why they have them, because we just end up being really messed up as adults. And there's nobody that's not, because we don't know what we do.
Here's a question that brings up, and then we'll let Nicolette get back to her regularly scheduled questions, because I see her looking. But here's a question, right? Resiliency, right? Mm-hmm. How important is that, right? That little kid lost their teddy bear. It affected them for however many years of their life. There's, in my opinion, there's always something to be said for like resiliency and grit and things like that, right? Because sometimes like life is not nice, most of the time, right? Life, it can be pretty hard. So it's that resiliency, I think, in us. And I guess my point is like, do some people have that more naturally than others? Do some people need to work on that more? Is that something that should be taught? I don't know. I mean, I grew up with a lot of resiliency. So it's hard for me to, but as you express someone with a teddy bear, I don't know. Is that hard for them?
The thing is that child at that age was completely resilient. They recovered from it. Mm-hmm. They went on, they got another toy, they did whatever. So this is really subtle. What we're talking about is really, really subtle. They had no idea what was running the engine or driving the bus or whatever. They had no idea why they were making the choices that they were making. So I think human beings are incredibly resilient because, again, we're from a survival impact. Mm-hmm. I mean, we will do what we need to do to stay alive. It's so hardwired in us to make sure that we're, being that in a survival, we'll do what we take. I mean, there's people that there's the guy, I think it was a hiker that had to take a blunt little knife and saw his arm off. I mean, in my opinion, that's massive resiliency, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So I don't know that it's a question of resiliency. I think, however, what people feel they deserve is a whole other conversation. And you can be really resilient inside of the idea that you don't deserve anything. You can still bounce back from that. I mean, you find people that live on the street, and I think that's incredibly. I don't think there should be such a thing as disposable people. It's something I think is very tragic, and many of them are mentally ill. That said, how much more resilient can you be than to find a way to live on the street, even if that's in a box and you're begging, and throughout history, we've always had beggars, right? We've always had these people playing this role. But most people wouldn't think of them as being resilient.
Where's the line between resiliency and straight up stubbornness? Where is that line?
Well, it's probably grit and stubbornness is probably right. The comparison,
stubbornness would be something that would be able to say, look, to me, stubbornness is, I'm going to do it the way I'm going to do it, the way I'm going to do it, the way I'm going to do it. And even if it means I lose a limb and you're showing me I'm going to lose a limb and I know I'm going to lose a limb, I'm still going to do it that way because I have to do it exactly the way that I have to do it. So a lot of people who are stubborn are also they have a lot of issues around control. That's got a lot to do with being stubborn. And at the same time, they can also be incredible advocates for other people because they will, when put into the right scenario, they can be absolutely stubborn at making sure that this gets heard, that the situation gets handled, that these people are have an advocate. So there's a way to use that part of our personality. But stubbornness often comes with it comes with kind of that survival impulse of I need to do it the way that I need to do it, because if I don't, I'm not sure that I'll be okay. That's kind of what drives stubbornness. And resilience is just the ability to keep going and to bounce back. And, sometimes I think stubborn people maybe have the edge on that.
I refuse to die out here. I am so stubborn. I will not die.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about it. You're and we talk about self-belief, right? Doesn't it roll back into that? Like you believe you're going to make it out of this situation, because we talk about that guy and I forgot his name. I remember watching the movie, but like he could have sat there and been like, okay, I'm just going to sit here and die. But he chose to, go, I'm not going to die. And I believe I'm going to make it out of this.
Right.
So,
right. So I think they do go hand in hand, but I think there is a stubborn person that can be very, very resilient. And I think they have the edge, but you don't have to be stubborn to be resilient.
That's right.
And where stubborn runs into trouble is if people are to the point where they hurt themselves. That's where stubborn runs into trouble. Where resilience, you can't really do that. If you're resilient, you're not resilient to the point where you hurt yourself. It's a little bit different. When you're resilient,
you're
Right.
Often keeping going.
That's true. Resilient, it's self-preservation, is almost like what resilience is, right?
But like with any emotion, there's an upside, there's a light and a dark with every emotion, right? Even with compassion, there can be, I strive for compassion. It's a word I think is missing on this planet at this time. And I think humanity is as well. I think there's a lot missing in the scope of humanity these days. We need to remember what humanity actually is, what compassion is, what stewardship is, because we're here to be stewards of ourselves, of one another, and of this planet. And in that regard, right now, I think, unfortunately, we're not doing so well, just in the whole stewardship front. But that said, the whole idea of what it means to actually kind of be the best version of yourself is ultimately the thing that I think is missing tragically from our society. So compassion bleeds into martyrdom, right? It becomes like, I'm not compassionate anymore. I'm a martyr. I must die for this. I must give my entire presence and life to this cause, as opposed to I'm going to be compassionate to this cause and I'm going to take care of myself because I can go much further faster. So there's that darker side. There's that darker side to love. I can be all loving, but then I can also be very jealous and judgmental and upset if I don't get that back, because I'm not loving in a way that I'm loving myself, right? I have to love myself first, or I don't have the capacity to love another human being, right? Now, we can love to the best of our ability, but that doesn't mean that we're actually knowing how to love. If we can't love ourselves, and we don't actually know how, but that doesn't mean people aren't loving. So it's a very interesting and very intrinsic conversation. It's a very delicate conversation to have.
Right. So so you mentioned like, okay, loving or to the best of their ability or whatever the case is, right? Or is it that certain people are, and I don't mean to say are limited, right? But they are who they are, and there's only so much. We're using love as the example. There's only so much they can love, or some people like aren't really angry people, like nothing really bothers them. Do you know what I mean? Is it how they are, or is it how they're taught?
It depends on the person. A lot of times it's how they're taught, because they may or may not have the awareness around who they're being, right? There's a term that's been bandied about for a long time called be the observer. Well, what the heck does that mean, right? What do you mean to be the observer? In my world, and what I work with my clients on, is we have to learn how to observe ourselves, our behaviors. So we have to start to bear witness to how we are receiving, how we are responding, how we are reacting, right? So if you are a person who has learned what your triggers are, who understands what personal accountability is and what it means when somebody says something that reminds you of something else, and therefore you're reacting to the something else and not the thing that's being said, then if they are not being angered, they're doing it because they recognize, wait a minute, this isn't this conversation. That's that conversation that took place 15 years ago. And this upset I'm experiencing is not actually real to this present situation. So they're being conscious. To somebody who is being reactive because something's being said to them and they're being triggered, but they haven't got a clue why, they're on the other side of the coin. They're behaving the way that they've learned how to behave. They're behaving the way that maybe they witnessed their parents behaving, because we're all repeating patterns. And that's why I don't point fingers at anybody. I believe everybody, with exception, there's always exception. I believe for the most part, everybody's parents did the absolute best that they knew how to do. That may not have made them great parents. And in some cases, it may have made them awful parents, but they did the best they knew how to do. So therefore, what patterns are we repeating? Are we repeating really awesome patterns? Or are we repeating really crappy patterns? And that's the legacy. Where do we come from? What are we choosing? Are we repeating it? And that becomes that question of consciousness. How conscious are we? And for a lot of people, the toughest thing to hear is that anything is possible, because when they hear that, they go, what do you mean anything's possible? If anything's possible, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be living this way. I wouldn't have this. I wouldn't have had this happen. And my wife wouldn't have left me. My husband wouldn't have cheated on me, whatever. They go to that immediate place of, don't tell me that, because I would never have chosen this. And some of the hardest places of acceptance is to realize, like, you may not have consciously chosen it. Nobody handed you a checklist and you went, oh yeah, that sounds like fun. Let me check this box, right? Let's just have bankruptcy and prison and all, and all. Let's just check because that sounds like a really fun experience, right? Nobody did that. What happened though is we got a program. We got programmed. We got influenced by everything around us. And then we let those things start to make the choices for us. So absolutely, if you're in a place where you're absolutely unhappy, yeah, your programming actually is a reason. It's the reason you're there. But why this is so important to be able to accept, it's not to be mad at yourself, because that just continues the pattern, is to realize, wow, I am that powerful. I am that capable. Because if I can create this unconsciously, imagine what I could do consciously. That's the important part. That's what makes all the rest of it become possible. That's why I have clients willing to do that, because they recognize that if they do that, they're then able to have whatever they want, literally.
True. You see?
I have my notifications turned off, by the way. So I have
Hey, that was one of those disembodied people letting us know.
See, it's true. Well, Deborah, as we're wrapping up, I would love if you could just leave us with some information about some of your new work, specifically the 33 Laws of Entitlement. And we'd love to hear about that before you leave us today.
Sure. The 33 Laws of Entitlement, I am working into an actual sort of, it's a community, it's going to be a community program. I feel really called to lead conscious communities. So I'm putting pieces together to do that. And the 33 Laws of Entitlement actually came from a time I was in a very, very bad car accident 3 years ago, and very lucky to be alive. And very grateful. And I was basically shut down entirely for quite some time, and immobilized for a while. And I wrote the 33 Laws of Entitlement. Now, when I say I wrote it, what I'm exceptionally good at in my work and in my world is I just get out of the way. I step back and let what flows through flow through. And so this, to me, just like my work, I call my work my vocation. This to me was the higher consciousness coming through and writing. And it started out as the 3 laws, and it went to 5, and I'm not a big fan. Then it's 6, then 12, then it was like 20, and then it was like 28, and then suddenly it hit 33. And I was like, that was it. I'm like, okay. So it's about 60,000 words that I wrote, which is the largest piece of work that I've written. And I was thinking, this is going to be a book. This is going to be a book, because it's a book. And then it was like, yeah, but it doesn't feel like it's time to do anything with this book just yet. So let's just hold on. COVID hit, all that stuff hit. And it was still just hold on. And now it's like, this is what you're going to do with this work. And it's going to be something that rolls out over a 33-month period. Not saying it will not be a book, but saying that each chapter of that book is now disseminating over sort of this whole conscious workshop that will, again, be 33 months in unfolding. So it's not the 40 days, 40 night thing. It's 33 months. But I just have really learned, especially from the car accident, that moment of reckoning for me. It just was like, you know what? I've just got to get out of the way and do what I feel is in my heart and soul to do. Because otherwise, I don't think I really have a reason to be here. And I don't mean that in a weird, strange, awful, icky sense. I just mean that like, life is beautiful and it's such a gift. And I'm here to do something with that. And, I think it's really sad that the graveyard is the most talented place on the planet. It's where the most gifted people are, because just like me, we sidestep the things that really call us because we don't know how to do them. We think we've got to get it right. We might be judged. It's the unknown. So therefore my very survival is threatened by the unknown. And this was kind of one of those wake up calls for me, to where now it's like, this isn't the meaning I have in my life. This is it. And if I'm doing this, everything else is amazing. When I'm not, it's like the little tornadoes start to swirl. I was like, okay, never mind. I'll just go back here. I'll just do this. So the 33 Laws of Entitlement is becoming conscious curriculum. It will be rolling out later. It'll be rolling out 2022. That's when the community will be starting. And I'm preparing some stuff like that right now. And so that's what that is. And the laws of entitlement, the word entitlement, it came, and I know a lot of people have stories around that word, about it being a bad thing. So just so they understand what the laws of entitlement are, one of the laws of entitlement is you are entitled to be the best person you can possibly be. You're entitled to follow your dream and actually have it. You're entitled to be generous in your life. You're entitled to be caring. So that's what we're talking about in the 33 laws.
So where can everyone find more about you, or more about the 33 Laws of Entitlement?
Well, the 33 Laws of Entitlement are still in work right now, but that will be rolling out. So they can find out more about me if you want to go to my website. And you can find it either just doing Rev Deb Bishop .com or DeborahBishop.com, DeBorah. But you can also go to Welcome to Bishop World, because I have music and I have art and I have workshops and so Bishop World has kind of become the brand for me. So Welcome to Bishop World, and BISHOP will also get you there. And I am just about to release a new ebook about the 9 indicators that fear is stealing from your life. So that'll be posted there very soon. And that's something I would really love for people to get their hands on. It's a small ebook, but it really helps them to understand how fear plays a role. And the program that I'm developing and starting to work on right now is about how to turn fear into your friend, because fear can actually be an incredible ally if you know how to use it. And if anybody wants to talk to me, they could go to book Deborah, Deborah, Bishop, Bishop.com. And that actually puts you on my calendar and we can have a chat. I'm happy to do that.
Thank you for joining us today, Deborah.
Thank you, Deborah. We really appreciate your time today.
I thank you both. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been a really diverse conversation.
We didn't get into aliens yet. I'm just joking.
So thank you.
Thank you, Deborah.
Okay.